You can't get AIDS if you touch, hug, kiss, hold hands with someone who is infected. Don't be afraid of us. We are all the same. And that was a quote from Nkosi Johnson, who was South Africa's small warrior against AIDS, who died in 2001 at the age of 12. Hey, and welcome to another episode of Cult Life with me, your host, Robin Jackson, coming to you all the way from South Africa. Thanks for joining me again this week and listening in. I really appreciate it. Thanks for all the responses so far on previous episodes. It's been wonderful to see how you guys interact and get in touch. And let's keep it up. Last week's episode was specifically interesting, and I got a lot of response from the listeners, so thanks for that. Today's show, we will be tackling the topic of HIV and AIDS. Now, South Africa, and I'm quoting from the last statistics that was released in 2017, we are a country of roughly about 57 million people. And the last statistics that came out in terms of the HIV and AIDS prevalence in the country is as follows. We had 7.1 million people living with HIV in the country, 18.9% adult HIV prevalence, 270,000 new HIV infections, 110,000 AIDS-related deaths, 56% of adults on antiretroviral treatment, and 55% children on antiretroviral treatment. So South Africa has had a very checkered past and grappled quite a bit with the AIDS and HIV pandemic. We had from a former president that was in denial that HIV causes AIDS, to where the antiretrovirals actually became readily available to many sufferers, and that's helped reduce the prevalence of it and the deaths related to HIV and AIDS. But I want to talk about the Watchtower Society and how their standpoint and their viewpoint has been with regards to this disease over the years. And the Watchtower Society has not been just content with giving biblical reasons for prohibiting blood transfusions. We all know that HIV and AIDS was thought at the beginning when the virus or the condition was firstly came to the fore. Blood transfusions was thought to be one of the main ways of acquiring the disease, as well as homosexual sexual relations and so forth. So there were quite a few articles and publications dealing with this question, and that was concerned about emphasizing the dangers of blood transfusions and the advantages of alternatives to the blood transfusions at the time. Playing to the witness community, the Watchtower and the Awake magazines were filled with horror stories normally, and some snide remarks, normally emphasizing the dangers of blood transfusions. As a result, most of Jehovah's Witnesses had plenty to say about the issue and believed the Watchtower policy protected them from diseases such as AIDS and the hepatitis virus, amongst others, and amongst other, horrible dangers of blood transfusions. And I can recall back then that during witness gatherings, there was and the discussion and the topic of HIV and AIDS would come up, or somebody would discuss, or somebody who has been infected, it was always the case of how great it is that the organization, that the blood transfusion ban has protected Jehovah's Witnesses from these diseases. However, looking at it now, as we now know that there are a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses themselves who are infected with the disease, and of course the disease is not only spread via blood transfusions. But I digress. Outsiders may be surprised to find that the Jehovah's Witnesses have so much to say in their publications about AIDS. For example, if you look at the Watchtower Publications Index between 1986 going on to 1990, there's almost a full-page spread on the subject, and with some 200 individual references to books and magazines discussing, the topic of HIV and AIDS. So it's been something that the Watchtower has delved into and had their say about, and we know that the Watchtower, over the years, when it comes to issues of science, was used to, even the earlier publications of the Watchtower and Aids used to punt a lot of quackery, in my opinion. If you look in the history of the organization, a lot of quackery and pseudoscience was punted in many of the literature published by the Watchtower and the Awake Society. One of the entries in the publications index makes mention of it says there that on page 16 of the index reveals, it says, best prevention is to become one of Jehovah's Witnesses. It says, referring readers to a specific quote to that effect. The different references, it turns out, actually feature the identical quote repeated in different Awake magazine articles. And this quote is supposedly from a Professor Vicente Amato Neto, a Brazilian expert on infectious diseases. And he was quoted as saying, I often say that the best prevention for AIDS is for one to become one of Jehovah's Witnesses. For the members of that religion are neither homosexuals nor bisexuals. They are loyal to their marriage, they're associated with reproduction, don't use drugs, and, to complete the picture, they don't accept blood transfusions. And that comes out of the October the 8th, 1988 Awake magazine. But, much the same could be said, of course, for any denomination or sect adhering to biblical moral standards. With exception, of course, to the last point that the Jehovah's Witnesses abstain from blood transfusions. But is joining the witnesses actually the best prevention for AIDS? As stated in the Watchtower and the Awake magazines? Well, the Watchtower Society makes this assertion without offering any supporting statistics. They only quote this Brazilian professor, and he probably accepted on face value the image that the JWs promoted via the sex public relations personnel at the time. But let's dwell on this matter of refusing blood transfusions. And we know that the medical community back then, when the HIV and AIDS virus came to light, began having a problem with HIV-positive blood donors and AIDS-contaminated blood. And of course, the Jehovah's Witnesses began pointing to this as evidence that they had been right all along in refusing blood transfusions. And I quote from the March the 8th, 1989 Awake. It says, AIDS-contaminated blood is a toxic substance. The magazine declared in a brief article titled Toxic Blood about a doctor who contracted the virus from an improperly discarded syringe. Yet it was not really the blood that was toxic, but rather the virus contaminating it. So not only blood, but all bodily fluids and tissues of AIDS carriers become dangerous to the extent that the HIV virus is present. So does the existence of contaminated water prove that people should avoid drinking clean water? Does the existence of contaminated food prove that people should avoid eating clean food? If not, then the existence of contaminated blood cannot be used as an argument against transfusions, especially with improved methods for screening contaminated donors. And this point, I read a book a few years back by a former Jehovah's Witness named David A. Reed, and he mentioned this in his book as well, this very same argument that I'm raising. And the most startling aspect of the situation is the fact that Jehovah's Witnesses themselves can get AIDS and do indeed get AIDS from contaminated blood products they do take. Although they reject whole blood, but of course some of the blood particles or parts of blood that is used in transfusions that they accept could at the time when screening was a limited thing to do, Jehovah's Witnesses could get the HIV virus by transfusing the blood parts of blood or blood plasma or particles into their or derivatives of blood into their system. So naturally in the beginning, when the virus came to light, they were totally clueless and printed all sorts of prejudiced crap that that was floating around the world in general at the time. That it was a disease of homosexuals, of drug addicts, people who took blood transfusions and so forth. Then people started showing up with a disease that were heterosexual and hadn't used drugs or taken a transfusion. And Africa is a good example of a place where these three groups are not the cause of AIDS, yet Africa is being decimated, including more and more Jehovah's Witnesses. The Watchtower Society has eased up somewhat, but to many individual Jehovah's Witnesses, they still think they are immune to the disease because of refusing the whole blood transfusion and so forth, and their so-called morals. But the Watchtower Society also had some very strange policies. Jehovah's Witnesses and people they study with who attended the meetings was supposed to tell the elders of their condition, if they were HIV positive or if they had full-blown AIDS. Of course, it was said to be kept confidential. We know within Jehovah's Witness circles nothing is confidential. They were clueless that people could be HIV positive and not even know that they are HIV positive. There was a rush for a while to buy cleaning products that supposedly killed the virus, and I remember at the Kingdom Halls, attendants, and I was one of them, were trained in the so-called proper way to clean up bodily fluids, and that was supposedly to prevent the transmitting of HIV and AIDS. People who had HIV and AIDS were also warned not to hug or kiss anyone. They would not be assigned to a private home for the book study. They would be baptized separately, or they would be baptized at the very last. They would be the last to get baptized. If they contemplated marriage, they had to get an AIDS test if the other person requested it. If it came back positive, the other one would break the engagement without any fear of punishment by the congregation. And I'm going to quote from a Watchtower article in the Awake magazine in 1994, and this is from the 22nd of March Watchtower, where it says helping those with AIDS. And I'll read from it, extract from the article, just to show you how prejudiced the Watchtower Society was at the time. It says there, and I quote, "Because of the life-threatening nature of AIDS, it is wise to keep in mind some reasonable precautions when welcoming an AIDS sufferer into our personal association or that of the Christian congregation. First, while no general announcement is to be made, we may want to inform one of the elders in the congregation of the situation, so that he would be prepared to give a kind and appropriate response to any who may inquire about the matter. The prudent AIDS sufferer realizes that others are sensitive about this disease. Therefore, out of respect for the feelings of those who want to be of assistance, it would be better for the AIDS victim not to initiate public displays of affection such as hugging and kissing. Even if there is little or no possibility that such gestures could communicate the disease, this restraint will show that the victim is considerate of others, thus engendering similar consideration in return. What should a person who knows he or she has AIDS do when he or she wants to become one of Jehovah's Witnesses and get baptized? Out of respect for the feelings of others, it may be wise for them to request a private baptism, although there is no evidence to suggest that AIDS has been transmitted in swimming pools. While many first-century Christians were baptized at large public gatherings, others were baptized in more private settings because of varying circumstances. Another alternative would be for the candidate with AIDS to be baptized last. Realizing that many have fears of the unknown, the person with AIDS should not be quick to take offense if he or she is not involved in private homes right away, or if it seems that a parent restricts a child from being in close contact with him or her. And if one of the congregation book studies is held at the Kingdom Hall of Jehovah's Witnesses, it may be wise for one with AIDS to choose to attend there rather than in a private home, unless that one has discussed the situation with the householder. Another situation in which an innocent person could become infected is by marrying someone who is unknowingly harboring the AIDS virus. The need for caution in such circumstances may be particularly necessary if one or both of the intended marriage partners had been promiscuous or had used needles to abuse drugs prior to coming to an accurate knowledge of God's Word. Since there is a growing number of people who have asymptomatic HIV infection, that is, no outward symptoms as yet, it would not be improper for an individual or for caring parents to request an AIDS blood test of the prospective mate prior to engagement or marriage, because of the devastating fatal nature of this disease. A potential marriage partner should not take offense if that request is made. If the test proves to be positive, it would be inappropriate for the infected party to pressure the intended mate to continue the courtship or engagement if the prospective mate now wishes to end the relationship. And that comes out of the Awake magazine. So a little bit of prejudice shown there to people living with the virus. And we know that much has changed in a lot of societies around the world as more and more understanding and research about the disease and the virus has come to the fore. And let's see what happens, what the Watchtower says in 2004 in the Awake magazine, the 22nd of the 11th. It says there, when will AIDS end? And under the heading Comfort for HIV-AIDS Sufferers, it says prevention efforts may be of little comfort to the millions of people who have contracted HIV and AIDS. Besides suffering the physical effects of the disease itself, they are often stigmatized and encounter rejection because of their condition. How so? A common yet erroneous belief is that casual contact can transmit HIV. Fear of contracting HIV and AIDS is understandable since it is both communicable and fatal. Some have allowed their fear of the disease to become an irrational fear of people with it. Sufferers have been refused medical treatment, expelled from church, and even violently attacked. Well, a decade earlier, the Watchtower was very much prejudiced against people with the disease or with the virus in the very same magazine that they published. And my argument is, and my thinking is, if the governing body, if you were God's chosen and sole channel of communication between God and men, how come you get it wrong, so wrong, almost all of the time? In my opinion, the governing body deliberately misquotes experts in the field and take passages out of context. It really gets to me because the vast majority of Jehovah's Witnesses will not look up the sources quoted in the literature, and they just blindly accept whatever is written as truth. And this just shows, if you look at, as I've stated before in the beginning of this episode, that the Watchtower goes along with the sentiment of the world at the time, be it pseudoscience, and it shows you that they themselves are not fully informed and no research is done. And science, the science of the time and how we perceive or understand a disease of the time and how it's communicated to the world, the Watchtower themselves latch onto it. So, if they were God's sole channel of communication, God should have given them and let them know and speak through the governing body, and would have, in my opinion, let them know that this disease cannot be spread via touch, hugging, and kissing, and so forth. But of course, Watchtower always misrepresents and misquotes and takes out of context to suit their doctrine, as we have seen many times over the past 100 years. So that's my show for today. The Watchtower on HIV and AIDS, the prejudice that has been there in the past, and it probably still is there. Misinformation amongst the older generation is probably still there with regards to this disease and how Jehovah's Witnesses perceive the disease. Thank you for listening, and join me again next week. And don't forget, please, you can interact with me on Twitter at RobinJackson70. And wherever you're listening to this podcast, please give it a like, give it a share it, and give it a review. And just drop me a mail to say hi, RobinJackson2020 @gmail.com. Thank you, and until next time, thanks for listening.